Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast. This is a place where we explore the world of horror and mystery in film, television, books, and popular culture. Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome. My name is Bruce Markison, and I'm joined by my co-host and producer, Tracy Asteria. Tracy, how are you? What's new?
Oh, I'm doing good, Bruce. Not too much new. Still battling through the month of January, but it's all good. Nice and cold here in Nova Scotia. How's everything going with you?
Yeah, it's been pretty cold here. Not like where you are. It's probably, 45 below with 7 or 8 feet of snow on the ground, something like that.
It feels like it.
Yeah, when does spring come in Nova Scotia, by the way?
Oh, it doesn't come soon enough. Usually not until the later part of April.
Okay, so late April. Well, that's similar to where we are in upstate New York. It's not too far away. We're in early January. So I always think about January as the coldest month of the year. February, a little bit less cold. And then we start to see some breaks in March and April. And before you know it, it'll be opening day in baseball season. So we have some things to look forward to. All right. Well, on this week's show, we're very glad to have with us someone we're welcoming back for the second time. He is a terrific chameleon-like actor, Ritchie Coster. Ritchie has compiled more than 60 credits in TV and film. He has been in some great movies like The Dark Knight, the remake of Rear Window, Let Me In. Also had a recurring role on the TV series The Walking Dead. Those are just a few of his many credits. Ritchie also featured in the new CBS series Watson, which is a creative adaptation involving the character from Sherlock Holmes lore. We're going to be talking mostly about that with Ritchie on tonight's show. And that new show, Watson, debuts Sunday night, January 26th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, that's network TV. It's on the CBS television network. Ritchie, welcome back to the Ghostly Gallery. Thank you. How you doing?
I'm well, my loves. How you doing? Thanks for having me again.
Well, we're glad to have you back on the airwaves here for the podcast. This is your second appearance. The first appearance, we really kind of looked at the breadth of your career. It's a fascinating career that goes back several decades. Tonight, though, we want to focus in on this new TV show. You worked the better part of 2024 on set, filming in Vancouver. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But as we get started here, Ritchie, I'm curious, did you read when you were growing up or when you were in England before you came to America? Did you read any of the Sherlock Holmes novels or short stories? Was that part of your area of interest?
I've been reading them all my life. I couldn't swear that I've read everything that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote about Sherlock Holmes. Wouldn't surprise me if I have. I read a lot of them as a teenager and then into my early 20s as well. And since then, I dip in once a year, maybe once every 2 years at least, usually around Christmas time. I like to have at Christmas time, I like to have something Victorian on the go. So I'll either dip into a bit of Dickens or I'll read a Sherlock Holmes story or two. So yeah, I've been reading them all my life.
Do you have one story or one novel that's a particular favorite?
I have to say, I don't mean to sound reductive, but a lot of the Sherlock Holmes stories, they kind of adhere to a template, and you kind of get the idea after a couple of stories. So it's, I remember it's been rare that I've actually been taken quite by surprise by a Sherlock Holmes story. It's like Cervantes' Don Quixote. I've tried to read Don Quixote about 5 times, and I start it and I'm loving it and it's enjoyable. And you get 100-page in, and you kind of say to yourself, you know what? I get the joke. And at some point, I throw it across the room at the wall. At that point, a little similar with Sherlock Holmes, but it's the style that they're written in and the world that they evoke. It's why I go to it at Christmas time, because it's that kind of Victorian Gothic Dickensian feeling to it. But I do always go back to the first one, Study in Scarlet. I think it's Study in Scarlet, the introduction of Sherlock Holmes and Watson, just because I find that story immensely gratifying.
Given that you've been a fan and that you've been reading these books rather regularly over the years, must have been especially exciting when you found out you'd have a chance to be on a TV series that's somewhat related to the Sherlock Holmes canon. That must have been great for you.
It was, and I'll be honest here, at the risk of being perhaps a little gauche. The day before the phone call came about this job, I was literally scrubbing a toilet on a construction site. I was so broke and so in debt. I would have taken the job as the guy in the hot dog costume. However, it turned out to be this script, Watson, that was like a very loose adaptation of the Sherlock Holmes stories. And there's a lot of changes, and you know it's CBS evening TV, so it's not set in that old Victorian London world, and Sherlock Holmes isn't even in it. Spoiler alert! But the character that I play, that they were interested in, I thought was extremely well written and very familiar to me, because he's like a bunch of guys that I've known in my life, but also the way it was written, I knew I could play it with some sort of Dickensian flair, which really appealed to me. So yeah, I mean, when I found out what it was and I read the script, I was thrilled, and it was a really good job. I mean, I was up there for most of last year, and it was a really good job. I was working with people that I've become very, very fond of. As in any, piece of drama, it's all about the writing, and the writing is great. The person that Craig Sweeney, who's came up with the idea and is running the show, is a complete devotee of Sherlock Holmes. He's the one responsible for Elementary, previous Sherlock Holmes iteration on TV. So I kind of felt like I was in safe hands, and it was a great job. And they gave me so much creative license to play with the character as I wanted to. So yeah, it's been marvelous. Life changed.
You mentioned Ritchie. Yeah, you mentioned that you got a phone call, so you didn't have to audition. Did you send in a tape? Was this something your agent really worked on? How did this all come about?
Something my agent worked on, and something no, I'm proud of it. Every now and again, I get a phone call saying there's an offer. And I don't have to audition. I don't have to send in a tape. But I've been around pushing 40 years now, so a lot of people in the business know who I am and what I'm capable of and what I'm not capable of. And so there's a lot of people who are willing to say, okay, let's have Ritchie, and we don't need to audition him for this. What I did have before they officially made an offer, and before I officially said yes, I had a what they call a creative meeting with Craig Sweeney and another of the executive producers, Larry Tang. And we talked for about an hour. Or forgive me, I talked for about an hour. I promised my agent that I wouldn't audition for them, I wouldn't read anything from the script, but I so wanted to impress them that I'd, in the couple of days since I'd got the phone call initially, I'd done a hell of a lot of work on a backstory and an understanding of what this character was and where he came from and what his life was like. So I said, let me just go over the backstory for you. And I talked and talked and talked. And then I came to a finish and I said, sorry, that was 10 minutes of your life that you're not going to get back. And Craig said, no, that was 45 minutes of our lives that we're not going to get back. And having said that, I said, look, I want to do this. And they said, we want you to do it. So official offers were made. It was all very gratifying.
Very nice, very nice. You mentioned a moment ago, Ritchie, it's not set in Victorian England. It's not in Victorian London. So tell us about the premise, when and where it's set. What kind of a twist is this on that Holmes Watson story? Holmes not in it, but obviously Watson is the main character.
Well, should you be familiar with the books? Anyone's that's familiar with the books, this is redundant me talking about this bit, but at some point, Sherlock Holmes died. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle decided he'd had enough of writing these stories, so he tried to kill Sherlock Holmes off, and he had Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, the arch nemesis of Sherlock Holmes, falling off a waterfall together, the Reichenbach Falls. What happened then in real life was that there was such clamour to get Sherlock Holmes back that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle started writing these stories again. And it's like, oh, no, I didn't die, says Sherlock Holmes. Only Moriarty died. I survived. And then went on to write more Sherlock Holmes stories for years. But where we begin is with that death of Moriarty and Sherlock Holmes at Reichenbach Falls. And this is set in the modern day. And Watson, Dr. Watson, who's American, in our version, returns back to Pittsburgh. And Sherlock Holmes has left in his will the finances and the support so that Watson can open up a clinic for rare and mysterious ailments. And so Watson can be a doctor again. That's where we start. Watson employs some of the best doctors he can find, and that's basically the premise. And so we'll have weekly medical mysteries. It's a little it's somewhat similar to House, that kind of structure, but we also have in there a lot of the Sherlock Holmes mythos. Moriarty, Sherlock's brother, a character called Irene Adler. The character Shinwell, who I play, is actually a character from one of the books. So the Sherlock Holmes Moriarty story does continue at the same time as these medical mysteries are being solved or not solved in Pittsburgh.
Why Pittsburgh? What's the significance of that?
Craig Sweeney, the creator and writer, comes from Pittsburgh. He's in love with that city, is in love with this city. I think both his parents, I can't remember if it's just one or both of his parents, are part of the medical establishment in Pittsburgh. So Craig knows the medical setup in that city quite well, and I think it's his love letter to his home city. And I'd never been to Pittsburgh, but when we were shooting the pilot, we spent a week doing exteriors in Pittsburgh, and what a lovely discovery! I had no idea it was such a glorious town. I'd spent my adult life thinking it was like still Pittsburgh, the steel town. Grey and smoky, but it's actually not like that. It's a colourful, diverse, imaginative, cultured, forward-looking city. I really enjoyed it. If you'll excuse me, I'll kill my dog. Ferry, please. Please?
Not literally, of course.
Not literally.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned about Pittsburgh. I first went out there, it's about, 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. My favorite player, Roberto Clemente, played for the Pirates. Actually, written a book about him. And I went there to do some interviews with some people. And I had always heard about the steel mills and the smokiness and the pollution. And you get there and you realize it's not anything like that. It's a beautiful town. It's almost it's a kind of a winding maze of streets. It's not built on a grid. So if you're not familiar with the roads, it's a little difficult to get from one place to another. But it's very beautiful the way it's set up. And there's a lot of interesting architecture and a lot of great things to do. So you're absolutely right. The perception of it is something that just doesn't fit what we see there in the current day, the contemporary day. You did mention a moment ago, Ritchie, the show Elementary, which ended just a few years ago, also on CBS. Had Johnny Lee Miller playing the Sherlock Holmes role. The Watson role was actually a female character, Joan Watson. So it sounds to me like this show, with the emphasis on the medical side of it, this is going to be completely different from Elementary. No similarity at all.
I'd agree with that. I didn't see much of Elementary. I've only seen a few episodes. No, this is not that. This is not that at all. There's definitely mystery to it. I mean, it's part of the Sherlock Holmes genre. It has to be about mystery and deduction. I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, any detective, any piece of work that deals with mysteries and detectives and police are in some way following the template that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself created. There just weren't detective stories before Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, at least that put an emphasis on the detective himself or herself. And as far as I know, before then, if there were crime stories, the villains were caught because of a certain because of failure on their part.
Mm-hmm.
Arthur Conan Doyle came along and wrote these stories, these mysteries that are solved purely through the prowess of the detective. I don't think that was a thing before, but it's been a thing thereafter. I mean, basically everything comes down to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, wow. It sounds like such an amazing show. I'm quite excited to start watching it when it airs. But can you tell us a little bit more about your character? Are you allowed to talk about it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. I think I am. His name's Shinwell Johnson. Mm. And he appears in one story, one of the Sherlock Holmes stories. You'd class him as one of the irregulars. Sherlock Holmes had a collection of people, which he called the irregulars, that were from various parts of London and various levels of the London strata. Many of them were from the underground, that helped him with what he was doing, the crime, the mystery he had to solve. Mm-hmm. And one of these was Shinwell Johnson, who was a London tough guy and a low-level villain who was in the process of reforming himself and changing his ways. That is true also in our version. When Dr. Watson goes back to Pittsburgh, Shinwell goes with him to keep an eye on him, to look after him, to ostensibly serve as administrative aid at this clinic. So I'm not one of the doctors. I just lurk around and say London things and act the tough guy when required. I enjoy it immensely. It's one of only a couple of times that I've been asked to play something that wasn't an out-and-out villain. Mm-hmm. And I always enjoy that more than playing the bad guy. He's a very colourful character. We've dressed him colourfully. Like I said, he's got a certain Dickensian flair to him. It's very enjoyable. The accent's very thick, and I think some people are going to have trouble understanding what I'm saying. But, hey, that's art.
Oh, wow. Oh, it sounds so cool.
It is. I tell you what I like best about the show. You know, it's not reinventing the wheel. Let me. These are very good stories told very well by a very committed and talented group of people. And what I like best about it is that there's a certain elegance to the episodes, to the storytelling, to the look of the piece that I think mirrors the original Sir Arthur Conan Doyle stories, which, if nothing else, have an elegance and a cleanness to them, a crispness.
Right.
And I think we've managed to carry that over. So it's not simply rapid editing and pretty young people and great lighting, though there's some of each of the above. But there is something, I think, something quite quietly beautiful about the episodes that I enjoy immensely.
Oh, wow. Oh, thank you for sharing that. Oh, it
Oh.
sounds like it's going to be an amazing production.
I'm looking forward to seeing it. I don't often watch what I do, but I am looking forward to watching this one.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow. You typically don't watch your projects?
After doing this for so long, I realized that sometimes you can have a really good time on the job filming, and it feels like you're doing good work. But in the end, there's no getting away from it. TV and movies are not an actor's medium. They are director's mediums and they are editor's mediums. So basically, once you step off the set, you have no idea what story is going to be told. Now, that can be frustrating sometimes when you're watching and you're thinking, why did they use that take? It was awful in that take. You know, they should have used the other one. Or it just sometimes you watch and it's not the experience you remember having. And also it has to be said, sometimes you can walk off the set thinking, God, I was brilliant today. I was really good. And then you watch it and you realize that you really weren't. It's never quite as good as you or bad as you think it is. And sometimes that can mar what was a really good day of filming.
Right.
So I kind of decided that, well, why put myself through that? And I do this now for the experience of the day. I mean, I laugh a lot at work and I enjoy the people at work and I enjoy the process and I enjoy what I do. I love it. I live for it. And then I step off the set and I can treasure it and cherish it as a really good experience. And I'm trying to wean myself. Rather, I'm trying to wean myself off the need to have that validated by what I see in the end. Now, that being said, I'm curious about this show and I think it's going to be very good. I legitimately do. And so I'm going to watch.
Oh, nice.
Ritchie, I have to ask one other thing about the character, because I was looking up this character on Wikipedia earlier today, and I noticed that the name of the character is Shinwell Porky Johnson. Is Porky going to be part of this?
There is one scene where another character says, shall I call you Mr. Johnson or shall I call you Shimwell? And I say, well, you can call me Porky if you like. And it's never mentioned again. And likewise, it's never explained in the original story, and we don't explain it either. I just like imagining the various reasons why he might be called Porky, but we don't delve into that.
Yeah, because you're not a heavy guy, so you're not going to wear a fat suit or anything like that.
No. He's described as a heavy guy. In the original story, he's described as, well, very heavy. With, I forget the word he uses for Shimwell's skin, but basically there's a word that means he has this kind of pox-ridden, greasy, nasty diseased skin covered in pustules. I forget what the word is. It's a lovely word though, but we chose to glide over that part of the description as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
years ago, you did a talk at another venue in upstate New York, and it was a lot of fun to watch. I was there, and you did talk about in this part you'll be interacting with a robot at various times. Tell us about that.
There's not much to tell. There's in the clinic. There's a robot. His name is Clyde.
Okay.
Clyde the robot. And incidentally, when I was doing the initial press interviews, we call it the EPK, the electronic press kit, for this project. I remember saying, "Oh yeah, we kept very close to the original source material. We even have the robot that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote about," thinking that they'd know I was joking, but they didn't. And I had to explain that one, which kind of took all the fun out of it. But we do have a robot, Clyde. He's one of those. Well, he's one of those day-to-day robots that picks things up and carries it over here and takes a test tube and turns it upside down. As I said the other night at that talk you were referring to, he's not R2D2. But for some reason, they have multiple scenes of me talking with the robot. Which you'd think would be a fun thing to do. I mean, ultimately I became an actor because of Star Wars, so you'd think that speaking to a robot like R2D2 would be something on my bucket list. Mm-hmm. But no response, no beeps or whistles or anything like that. Just as I described it the other night, this kind of empty box on wheels with a guy behind it pushing it and trying to keep out the camera's way. Those were hard scenes to do.
Yeah. Who supplies the voice of the robot?
No voice.
Oh, no voice. Okay.
No, it's not a talking robot. It's not C-3PO. It's literally just like a box with an arm that carries things around.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I don't know if they think it has some sort of cute personality, and maybe it will end up doing so, but I didn't see it. Yeah.
Well, one person who will be doing a lot of talking is Morris Chestnut. He is the guy who plays Dr. John Watson. Morris Chestnut has appeared in many of the TV shows. Rosewood. He was in season 1 of American Horror Story. He was also in the miniseries V. So he'll be playing Dr. Watson. Have you ever interacted with him before? Do you know him before this series?
No, I knew of him. My jam has long been a big fan of his, but I didn't really know his work. And what a delightful surprise he has been. I've met a lot of classy people in this business. He might be the very classiest. An utter gentleman. Quiet, generous, cheerful, supportive. He's just a joy. And he's bringing something quite specific to the role of Watson that I think is marvelous. It's partly about that elegance that I was talking about earlier and dignity, but also something very fiery and human and angry and dirty. It's quite fascinating. He's a pleasure to work with. We call him number one because there's a call sheet. The daily call sheet is the thing that comes out and says, then we're doing this scene with these characters, and the actors are listed on that call sheet, and the first number one is always the lead of the piece. So he's our number one, and what a lovely number one he is. Absolute joy.
Yeah. That's great to hear. Most of the scenes that you have, you'll be interacting with him, I guess?
Yes. Yeah. And a great actor to work with. A very, very generous, classy, involved actor.
One of the things I read was that shortly after he signed on to be the star of this show, Watson, you were one of the first actors that was hired after that. So I'm wondering if he had some influence in picking you.
Possibly so.
Yeah.
I nothing was said about that, and I never asked. And because you learn in this business not to ask what the process was of you being offered the job, because you'll always find out, always, that there were 7 people that they offered the job to before they came to you. I mean, this goes for every single actor. I mean, I remember quite famously, I forget who it was that said, I think it was Russell Crowe said, "Oh, they never just offer me the job. They always offer it to Leonardo DiCaprio. And when he says no, they offer it to me." There is always, just like there's always someone tougher than you, there is always someone bigger than you that they actually would prefer to have in the job. So you don't ask the questions like, what brought you to me, or why did you think I should be doing this role? Because, don't ask questions you don't want to hear the answer to, because you might hear, well, we really wanted so-and-so. They weren't available. So we went to so-and-so, who thought about it for a while, and then he said no. So we went to this other guy, and he was in China. So we went to this other guy, and then 2 other people, and then we came to you. So I don't ask those questions.
Yeah. Morris Chestnut, of course, an African-American actor. The original John Watson was an Englishman, was Caucasian. Will there be the issue of race introduced into some of this storyline throughout Watson?
Not so far, and I don't think it's going to. There are some issues of race dealt with in a completely different context. But no, that's not something that we really delved into. I think ultimately these are roles that you could cast as anything with a little flexibility. And particularly if you go over the iterations of Dr. Watson recently, it's Watson that's, let's say when I was growing up and it was the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes that we were watching. And I don't even remember the name of the actor that was playing Watson, but Watson basically was kind of a portly man smoking a cigarette and drinking a glass of wine that would say, "Oh my God, Sherlock, that's amazing. Yes, I'll have another piece of cake." And that's what he did. But recently, I called to mind Elementary, Sherlock, which played in Britain recently, the Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movies. Dr. Watson has started to be explored as like as equal and as colourful a character in different ways to Sherlock Holmes, which I really like. I find fascinating because sometimes it's the charisma and the fascination of the actor playing Sherlock Holmes that makes it work. Sometimes it's the dynamic between the Sherlock Holmes and the Watson that is really fascinating. So I like that Watson's been explored and opened up, and you can approach that character from a myriad of different ways. Morris does that all justice, I think.
So, Richie,
Yeah.
this program, it was filmed in Vancouver. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Have you ever been to Vancouver before, or was this your first time?
No, I've been there before. There was a period about, I don't know, 17 years ago where a lot of things were filming in Vancouver. I was there for a few months to do a TV miniseries based on Traffic, the movie. And then a couple of years later, I went back to do a TV pilot for Fox called Virtuality, which didn't get picked up. It seemed like everyone was going to Vancouver all the time back then, and then I wasn't back there until this job last year. A lovely, lovely city it is.
Oh my gosh. Can you tell us about some of the filming locations around Vancouver that you went to?
Not that many, to tell the truth, because, well, basically you leave the studio. It's very hard to hide the fact that we're not actually in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
If a show is shot in Canada and they do externals and they try to tell you that it's New York or Los Angeles or Pittsburgh, you can tell immediately.
Right.
So much of what we did, we took a few exteriors when we were in Pittsburgh, but much of the season takes place inside the clinic itself,
Okay.
which is great because it's not about claustrophobia, but it's about, those Sherlock Holmes mysteries, the deduction, the twists and turns of the story. A lot of it all takes place on a microscopic level. A lot of it all takes place under a microscope on a computer screen. And I'm not saying that there are no dynamics at play here, but a lot of it takes place in this crucible of medical genius that is this clinic, which I find quite thrilling. So no, I couldn't actually tell you. I don't think I could tell you. Oh, there was one location we shot at. I forget what it was standing in for. I'll remember, but it is an old Victorian sanatorium in Vancouver, which has been closed down for years. But it was a sanatorium, a mental institution,
Right.
going back into the early 1900s, if not the late 1800s. And you can imagine the horrors that have taken place in this building. And it is a seriously, seriously creepy place. It's actually quite unpleasant to film there. I only had to be outside on the grounds, but there were people on the show that filmed inside, and they said they didn't want to go back in there. And I'm pretty sure it was the place. I don't know if either of you remember a horror movie from the 1990s called Session 6 or Session 9.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I think it's where that was filmed.
Oh, wow.
I'm pretty sure because what I can remember of that movie, it's the same building, which I'm pleased about because I was deeply, deeply upset by that film. I thought it was great. So we did film that.
Oh, interesting.
Nice.
And was it Bridge Studios that this year? Oh, cool.
Yeah, Bridge
okay.
Studios.
Bridge Studios. I had to ask you that. I was curious. Stargate many years ago had been filmed at Bridge Studios, so I was wondering if it was the same
and
one.
I'll tell you a great Bridge Studios story. It was towards the end of the season. I was having a really dark week. And just to set context of where it was in the year, the American election had just happened. Autumn had just set into Vancouver. So the cloud cover came over and it stuck. And it was raining a lot. And it was getting dark so early. It was getting dark about 4 o'clock, 3:30. And it turns out, I don't know if you know this about crows and jackdaws and ravens, corvids, that they all like to gather in the same place at dusk.
Yes.
And talk about their day or whatever it is they're doing. And they come from miles around. And it turns out that the place in Vancouver where all the crows and ravens went was about a mile away from Bridge Studios. So Bridge Studios was a stopping ground on the way to this place. So there were certain days that you'd go out, step out of the studio into the grounds at about 3:30, dark grey dusk, and every surface you could see had a crow or a raven on it. And that sound of which is so like evocative of, death, something nasty.
Yep.
It was all you could hear. And it was so fitting for the time of year. I'd always, up until then, thought of Bridge Studios as a lovely, sunny, happy place because I was always having such good experiences there. But there were these days at the Crows that were just soul-sucking. It was like something out of Edgar Allan Poe. It was lovely.
Oh
Mm,
my
yeah.
goodness. Oh, wow. I know we have a bottling plant here where I'm at, and the crows gather there in the big trees that surround this plant at night as soon as the dark comes, and you can hear that same sound, and it's quite eerie
It's
actually.
eerie and it's also fascinating,
Mm,
isn't it, Tracy?
It,
What are they
it
talking about?
mm.
I'd love to know.
Yeah.
Secrets of the universe, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Mm.
Speaking
Oh
of
my
which,
goodness. Yeah.
can we speak a little about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself?
Yes.
Sure. Absolutely.
Just this, I just wanted to voice what a fascinating figure he was. Um, one of these Victorian men that was kind of a jack of all trades, an accomplished sportsman. Apparently, not a very good doctor. He couldn't get a doctor's practice
Hmm.
for the life of him, though he was a very good doctor at sea. Accomplished sportsman, a cricketer, a boxer, a bodybuilder. He was apparently best mates with Eugene Sandow, who's regarded as the father of modern bodybuilding. And he had this very strange fascination with mysticism, the supernatural,
Hmm.
and spiritualism, and
Hmm.
was a devout, for many years, was a devout spiritualist. And I just am fascinated by somebody would come out with proof of spiritualism, of life after death, like a seance or something like that. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle would go and see it and say, yes, yes, this is real. And then it would be revealed as a hoax sometimes later. But he'd keep doubling down on that spiritualism was true, was real. This happened for years. There's a very famous collection of photographs that were taken at some point in the early 1900s. The photographs of a little girl, black and white photograph of a little girl with fairies.
Hmm.
And I forget what they're called, but they were announced as proof that fairies did exist. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was at the forefront of promoting these photographs. You can tell with one look that they're fake. And sure enough, they were revealed as fake a couple of years later, and he refused to admit it. And he just kept going on and on for the rest of his life.
Interesting.
I used to think it was because he was very attached to his son who died in the First World War, and he wanted it to be so. So he could somehow get to talk to his son again. But it turns out that he became a spiritualist before his son's death.
Yeah.
But I think maybe it's something of the time at the end of the First World War. Everyone was so shell-shocked and bereaved that they all wanted there to be life after death just for some shred of comfort in this universe. And he was part of that. But, you know, for this really like clever, high achievement, high functioning man, just couldn't let go of this belief in charlatanism and quackery. I find that fascinating.
So
I'm
what's
glad
really
you brought that up because I'm sorry, Tracy. I'm glad you brought it up, Ritchie, because this interest in supernatural. Doyle wrote a number of excellent stories about ghosts and vampires and mummies, and even a few of his Sherlock Holmes stories do incorporate some of these supernatural aspects. So that's a big part of what he was about.
Yeah, yeah. But correct me if I'm wrong. The stories that are about the supernatural end with, the ultimate rational mind, Sherlock Holmes, coming along and basically proving that it's all a load of nonsense and crimes afoot, like an episode of Scooby-Doo.
Right.
Damn that Sherlock
Yes.
Holmes! I would have got away with it without him. But
Yeah.
that's the one thing that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself couldn't do, was
Yeah.
what he wrote about Sherlock Holmes doing, which is unveiling the hoax. He couldn't do it himself. But nonetheless, all of his stories, they're all kind of shrouded in mist. If they're not exactly about the supernatural, you kind of picture them under a Victorian gaslight and misty streets and empty streets apart from the sound of one pair of footsteps, 20 yards behind you. That's what you feel from these stories. I think that's why we like them so much. They're so evocative of that.
Oh my goodness. We have, I recall reading a story about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and it pertains to Antigonish County here in Nova Scotia. And it involves it's a supernatural story. It's the Mary Ellen Spook Farm. So she was known as the Nova Scotia Fire Starter. And it was purely supernatural. It's a great story. You'll have to look into it. But he was kind of fascinated with this little girl who was able to start fires kind of like with her mind. And they thought that she might have been possessed by like a poltergeist or a demon or something along those lines. And I'm not sure if he actually visited the site or if he was just sent stories and documentation.
I'll look into that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's because I remember hearing something about that, and I was like, "Oh, that's the Sherlock Holmes guy." So yeah, I'm gonna have to look at that a little bit more too. But I thought I would let you know because it's such an odd connection, to such a small little place here in Nova Scotia.
And it also reminds me that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was in Vienna for a while. I for life me can't remember what he was doing there or when, but I don't know if he was just vocal about it or if he met Freud. But Freud and he apparently were such loggerheads because Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a firm believer that most forms of mental illness, schizophrenia, etc., were types of spiritual possession. Right. And Freud was saying, no, that's not true. But yeah, he was like in many ways hundreds of years behind the curve when it came to certainly psychological medicine. Which your story made me think of was the little girl. Was she possessed or psychic abilities, or what was it?
And nobody has ever been able to figure that out either.
Is that right?
Yeah, there's been the farm is now kind of like a desolate place. It's all grown up. And one of the mythological pieces, if you try to go to this place, the spook farm, and take like any kind of land item like a rock or anything like a handful of dirt to bring it home, the mythology goes like your home will catch on fire because it's an attachment. And part of the paranormal team that I'm a member of, the group owner actually knows where this place is. He's investigated it, and it's private property, so there's like no trespassing. The current owner doesn't allow anybody on his site, but my paranormal friend took a rock and nothing happened to his house, mind you, but still it's kind of like that paranoia is like, well, will something happen? And it's so interesting. There's a lot of really cool stories about the Mary Ellen Spook Farm.
I've always loved that notion that that a geographical place is actually many hundreds of years later is still imbued with I don't know what you'd want to call it, the characteristics, the psychic energy of a person or an event or a series of events. Like, I don't know if I'm not particularly a spiritual man or religious or anything like that. I don't believe in ghosts, but I can quite firmly swear that I have been into rooms where I'm convinced that I am not wanted. And I don't mean the usual, as in I'm not wanted by the people in there, but I'm not wanted by the space itself.
Right.
I used to own a house in New Jersey. Lovely house. Quite welcome there I was, but in the basement, and it was a finished basement, I was not welcome. And I told my brother this. My brother came to visit from England, and I told him about this, and he said, "This is nonsense, Ritchie." And he insisted it was nonsense until the last day of his vacation, and he was going to fly back the next morning. He said, "I tell you what, I'm going to stay up all night because I've got an early flight, and I'll stay up all night and I'll spend it in the basement." And the next day he said to me, "Ritchie, that was the worst night of my life. You're damn right. There is something down there that doesn't want us." So that's where I've always been fascinated by this notion of like a house doesn't want you, or a house is possessed of the thing that happened there. I mean, this is I don't mean to use this illusion in a flip way. It's the last thing one could be flip about, but I've heard it told by a few people that they've visited Auschwitz, the site of Auschwitz. And one of the few places they've been in their life, if not the only place, where you cannot hear birdsong, and you never see a bird fly over the geographical site of Auschwitz. Now that might be urban myth, of course, but the people I've spoken to were there and they swear by it. But I think that's the same thing about these, places become tainted.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. The residual energy of like all of the hardships, the bad energy, like it always kind of stays present. Like I feel it always stays present. Just if something terrible has happened, there's always going to be that heaviness about the area, I think.
But also one has to acknowledge that goes the other way as well. I also believe that there are places that are imbued with the spirit of joy and celebration and light and laughter. I mean, it has to be. I'm sure I've been into those places. I don't want to live in the universe where there is one without the other,
Exactly. Oh my goodness.
Ritchie, before we let you go, no, that's great. Great conversation. Last question. How many episodes of your new series, Watson, will be airing this year? And when do you think 13. Okay, 13 episodes. Also, when do you think you guys might hear about a possible renewal for a season 2?
Well, I tell you what's going to happen. They're going to show the pilot on the 26th. I think it's for the next 2 weeks. In that time slot, they are going to replay the pilot simply because on the other channels, I think it's the Super Bowl and another playoff. They don't want to be competing against those. So they'll show on the 26th, and there'll be a couple of weeks, then they'll get into the season. I think they'll at least wait until 3 episodes in before they, so that they can see a trend, whether viewership is going up or going down. Yeah. So I think legally contractually they have to make a decision by some point in June, but I think they'll be making their decision by the end of February. Fingers crossed.
That's exciting.
We have the fingers crossed here as well. It debuts Sunday night, January 26th. Great time slot, 9 p.m. Eastern. And you follow what is, I believe, the #1 rating show in the country, Tracker.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Yeah.
That's not a bad spot to be in.
That's a great lead-in for you. And listen, we wish you the best of luck with the new show. Looking forward to seeing the first one on the 26th and the other episodes. And we certainly hope it is renewed for a second season. Ritchie, as always, thanks. Really appreciate it.
Not at all. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Bruce and Tracy. I enjoy the show very much.
Oh, thank you.
Well, we thank Ritchie Coster, terrific and prolific actor. His new series, Watson, coming up on CBS. We'll take a short break, and then Tracy and I will come back and wrap the show up with a few random thoughts on our new IMDb page. We'll also talk about a movie that Tracy saw recently that you might not have heard about. It's called Humane, and it has a connection to the family of David Cronenberg, the great director. We'll be back. The Ghostly Gallery podcast continues in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Ghostly Gallery podcast. We hope you enjoyed the conversation with Ritchie Coster, fine actor. So I know that I did. Tracy did as well, talking about his new TV series, Watson, coming up on CBS. Tracy, as we get set to wrap things up on this edition of the Ghostly Gallery, just a couple of random points I wanted to touch upon. One is the fact that we have an IMDb page, which I stumbled upon just a few days ago. And of course, I should have known that you were the one that created it. So we can find the Ghostly Gallery podcast on IMDb. I'm thrilled about that.
Absolutely. And all of the episodes are listed, and it is a continuous work in progress. So it's kind of exciting. We have everything listed. Eventually, like, our guests will be listed in those episodes as well. So you'll be able to link back to the YouTube channel and watch which ones you'd like to see.
Very nice. Will you have eventually biographies of the two of us?
I hope so. Send me your details.
Yeah. All of my previous film credits.
Yes, your
of which there are none. Yeah.
Listen,
They're absolutely none. Yeah. You haven't done any series or movies, have you?
No, but maybe someday.
Okay. But there is an IMDb page, the Ghostly Gallery podcast, and Tracy will be adding to it over the coming weeks. So we're excited about that. Also, Tracy, wanted to briefly mention, in the aftermath of all this talk of Nosferatu, which has really taken over the horror world, it's also become, I think, the #1 film at the box office. It's done really well since it debuted on Christmas Day, December 25th of last year, 2024. One thing, though, it's been a pet peeve. If I see one more person on Facebook or Twitter complain about the mustache that Bill Skarsgård wore in playing the part of Count Orlok, I will jump at that point. I mean, it is just ridiculous. People don't seem to have any sense of history. If you look at some of the old drawings of, Vlad the Impaler, which some people believe is the basis for Dracula, if you look at drawings of people in Middle Europe from, the 14th and 15th and 16th and 17th centuries, you will see that those kinds of mustaches, the mustache that Skarsgård sports in the movie, they're very much the same. There's very similar. And I don't know why people are obsessed with this. They say they were distracted by the mustache. I just think it's ridiculous. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, I didn't know it was Bill Skarsgård until I, saw the credits and stuff. I thought the mustache was unique to say, it was unique, but I think it didn't damage the character's appearance at all. It is what it is. And I thought what they did with him, I thought it was amazing. There is a lot of uproar about it online, like TikTok and Instagram and all over Facebook. And I just giggle because, I thought it was a great movie and I thought his appearance was great. Don't knock it. I thought he was great.
Yeah. You didn't find it distracting at all?
Not at all. I think it was the voice, just like his voice just kind of took over. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was really more taken aback by how much he scared people and his threats of killing people and then killing people and making them, into these infested characters. To me, that was what I wasn't distracted by that, but that is what I really took away from the part. And I thought very little about the mustache, and why people continue to talk about it is beyond me. It's kind of strange. The other thing, Tracy, I wanted to mention, this is a movie that you made me aware of. You've seen it. I have not. Came out earlier in, I guess, the spring of 2024.
Mhm.
It's called Humane, and you really liked it. And you also discovered that it's directed by someone related to the great David Cronenberg. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so Humane came out in April of 2024. It is a horror thriller, and it's directed by Caitlin Cronenberg, who is the youngest daughter of David Cronenberg. And this actually is her first feature film, and it's really quite unique, actually. It's set in a dystopian type future following like a global ecological collapse. And this film explores extreme measures on how to reduce the Earth's population in order to combat some of the ecological damage and try to make repairs, just because the world is so overpopulated. And it's got a really good premise and a really good storyline. It's not your typical horror film, but it is classified as horror. It's a horror thriller. And there's even some comedic moments as well with some of it, which is really odd. It's an odd combination, but it really works well. It's really good.
So, Tracy, it's not body horror like many of Cronenberg's most well-known horror films. Not like that at all.
No, not at all. It's a lot of psychological. So basically, like, I'll give you just a quick rundown of the storyline. It's about a retired journalist. He's quite famous, and he gathers his adult children in for what appears to be just like a normal family dinner. But he's using this occasion to reveal his participation in the government's euthanasia program. And this is how the government has decided to reduce the population of the world. So the way he presents it, it's a wonderful decision that he has made, and it presents like a selfless sacrifice to alleviate his family's future burdens. So basically, because the world is overpopulated, each country is mandated to reduce the population, and citizens are asked to volunteer, or what they call enlist, into the program in exchange for a monetary reward that is given to their family. And, you know, it's super intense. There's like a lot of twists and turns, and it blends a lot of like horror and kind of drama together. But it's really good. It's a real psychological type thriller.
You were telling me that it's filmed in, not your neck of the woods, but in your country, in Canada, Hamilton, Ontario, and some interesting sites there.
Yeah, it's, oh my goodness, Ravenscliff Castle in Hamilton, Ontario is beautiful. It's only filmed there's a couple of outside shots, but then it's mostly filmed inside this castle. So it's just beautiful. And it kind of gives you like, I don't know, a little bit of like a claustrophobia type feeling as you're watching the movie as well, because although the rooms are large, there's so many twists and turns in these rooms. It's pretty cool. It's like really good atmospheric tension. And again, like there's some really good names. Emily Hampshire, and if you're a Schitt's Creek fan, she's in it. She plays one of the daughters, and she provides some great comedic relief, and she's got quite the sharp tongue, and it's it's really good. Definitely gives you kind of like Stevie vibes. And then there was oh my goodness, Enrico and oh my gosh, Enrico
Colantoni?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
He's a good actor. Yeah.
He is wonderful. So he plays a guy named Bob who's in charge of this program, and he comes to collect what he's supposed to collect. And oh my gosh, he's so serious, but he's quite funny. He provides those moments at the right time. And he's excellent. He's very standout. And there's just another well-known actor, Peter Gallagher. So he's been
Oh,
in
yeah.
like a ton of different things. And although he's not in it for a long portion of this film, he is like the father, so he is the journalist, and he is at the center of the story. But he's excellent as well. Everybody is wonderful in this film.
Gallagher, I haven't seen in films recently, but he was pretty prominent back in the late 80s, early 90s. He was doing a lot of movies. I frankly thought he had retired, but he's still active.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what the gap was between his last project and this project, but as the credits were rolling in this film, there are a couple of voice credits too. Colm Feore has a voice credit
Oh, yeah.
in this, and I
Mhm.
believe her father has a voice credit as well for a role. So yeah, it's kind
Very
of
nice.
interesting. Yeah, I definitely
Final
recommend.
question, Tracy. Where can people see this? Is it available through streaming?
It is. So you can catch it on Prime Video or Apple TV if that's your preference, but they're on both.
So it's the 2024 film Humane, directed by one of the daughters of David Cronenberg, and it's available Prime Video and Apple TV. You'll have to put that on my list. Try to watch it this week if I can. Great stuff, Tracy. Appreciate your input on that, the IMDb page, and the all-important mustache of Nosferatu. Thanks for being with us. We appreciate your efforts as always.
Thank you. It's been fun, and it was great speaking with Ritchie earlier.
Yes, we had a good time talking to the actor Ritchie Coster as well. We thank Ritchie, Tracy, and all of you for listening, for joining us in this Museum of the Macabre. And we do hope we'll see you again the next time, right here in the Ghostly Gallery.